This episode is sponsored by Campfire Pro, a brilliant writing and world-building program that gives you tons of tools to keep track of all the details of your story and world. With it, you can make easily accessible and referenceable detailed character sheets, timelines, interactive maps, and it also comes with full privacy. In addition to these features that comes with the standard package, you can also grab the world building pack with even more tools to help build your world. Make new species, items, magic systems, and develop your culture with religions, philosophies, and languages with this massive bundle of additional features. Campfire Pro is a one-time purchase of $49.99 US, and the world building pack is available for an additional $24.99. With Campfire Pro, you can do away with those massive text documents where it's so hard to find the specific information you need. Keep everything easily and accessible. So, a big thank you to Campfire for sponsoring this video, and if you would like to learn more about Campfire Pro, there is a link in the description below.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I am Shad and I am making a video essay, or are they called film essays? I don't know, but if I'm going to be doing one of these, I better speak in a very soft voice to make myself sound more convincing. You know, the type with soft music in the background to create a false veneer of authority and intellect. Very similar to the philosopher Junkev Ulf Wonkvanek said, authority and credibility is but an illusion of perception. Which I just made up right then, because screw all that, I'm just going to be talking about facts and logic here. What facts and logic am I talking about? I want to talk about the very concept of quality. What makes something good or bad? Because this is a deeply interesting subject for me as someone who likes to try and create things of quality. I want to make stuff that is good. Perhaps even great. I want to make things of the greatest quality possible, but to do that, there are a lot of things I need to try and understand. This is both as a YouTuber, content creator, but also as a storyteller. I'm a writer, novelist. And in my quest to try and learn how to create things of true quality, of exceptional quality, in fact, I have learnt some very interesting things that I want to share with you. Now, this will be instructive for people who want to create things of quality, but also for those people who want to try and review something to see how good it is. And so we start with a deeply philosophical question. What is good, or what is quality? Because quality only exists with a point of reference. Without such, the mere concept of quality does not exist. For something to be considered good, we need a standard to measure it against. This is the very same thing for the concept of big or small. You can only judge something to be big or small with a point of reference to judge it against. For instance, Mount Everest is very big in comparison to a person, and so the point of reference we're using is the size of a person. But suddenly if you switch up that point of reference to the size of planet Earth, Mount Everest suddenly becomes very small. And if you could then switch that up again to the size of a star, Mount Everest is minuscule. And what we are finding here, Mount Everest can actually be considered both large and small, depending on the point of reference we are using. And this is exactly the same way in which we determine quality, or what is good. It is by the standard we are applying it against to establish a point of reference. Now, in many cases, we can actually find universal standards that exist irrespective of anyone's opinions on the matter. And this is where we come to a wonderful word called objectivity. When a fact is an objective truth, it is a truth irrespective of anyone else's opinions on the matter, but it also is a matter of correct definitions. And if anyone wants to disregard what definitions are, then you're disregarding the very purpose of language. But if you can establish a uniform, consistently accepted definition of what something is, thereby establishing an objective standard for something to conform to, you can establish the objective reality of something irrespective of anyone's opinion of it. For instance, the definition of a planet is very well understood, and by that definition, I, myself, Shad, am not a planet, but Earth The planet we are on is a planet because it conforms to that definition. And you can apply this logic to anything in existence according to its definition. Things will naturally conform to a definition, whatever that definition is, and these are objective facts irrespective of what people think about it. But what about quality? Well, this is interrelated in a very important manner. For instance, what is a statue? A statue is a fairly specific definition, and if you have something that is carved out of stone that is meant to reflect the image or appearance of something else, well, guess what? This is conforming very accurately to what a statue is. So this, therefore, is a statue irrespective of what people think about it. But is it a good statue? Well, to figure out that, we need to apply another standard. And one of the more common standards we have for statues is for them to more accurately reflect the thing they are meant to appear as. And so a statue of a person is meant to look like a person. And the more accurate appearance of that person, the better quality standard we can apply to that statue to determine if it is good. Unless another standard is added in for the statue to try and achieve or to be judged against, like abstract realism. Now, this might seem really basic and obvious, and in all honesty, it is, but it's so interesting that these things need to be broken down into such specific detail because there is this interesting debate that exists in the world of the objective versus the subjective, and honestly, I feel a lot of people misunderstand this argument. There is a concept, an idea that everything is subjective, and that statement is really just warped and twisted because first of all, that's an objective statement, and so it's a self-contradicting thing. If everything is subjective in such a way that nothing can be objective, this statement that I've just made, which is objective, contradicts itself. The obvious truth to what people are trying to say when they say everything is subjective is not that everything is absolutely subjective and not objective, is that everything can be judged in a subjective point of view. But that subjective point of view does not contradict the objective reality of what that thing is. So you can subjectively believe that a planet is actually a person, but then we're coming into a subjective decision on what a definition is, and it wouldn't really work because definitions are actually more determined by collective understanding of language, and the meaning of planet is more broadly understood very clearly to not be a person. So you can believe as much as you want that a planet is actually a person. That's not going to change the objective reality of what a planet is and what a person is. So people can view things from a subjective point of view, but that does not contradict the objective reality of things. And so what this actually means is that nothing in existence is truly subjective. They can only be viewed from a subjective point of view. And then if you want to go further with this to try and determine if something is a good planet or bad planet, again, you need to apply an additional standard to determine what would be good or bad. A common one for what humans consider to be a good or better planet usually is a planet that can support human life. And according to that standard, Earth is a much better planet than Mars. But if your standard of quality is what planet appears more red, well, suddenly Mars is going to be considered much better than planet Earth. The additional thing that many people misunderstand about the very concept of subjectivity is that subjective views are actually the objective standards we are subjectively choosing to judge something by, which actually, in addition, means that they're still actually objective. Even if the standard that we are choosing to judge something by is our own personal tastes, well, our own personal tastes are actually an objective framework that we can define specifically in a specific list that we can then judge something by in a very objective framework. For instance, I really like swords. Anything with a sword in it I naturally like more than if it was axes instead of swords. So a hero character who uses a sword I naturally find far more appealing and cooler than if they were using an axe. Now, my personal preference to liking swords is a subjective thing. It exists for whatever reason, but the standard I am applying of if something has a sword in it or not is an objective objective standard I am judging something by. So even the subjective preferences that you choose to apply to something to determine if you like it or not, or if it is good or not, are still objective standards that you are then judging something to determine if it's good or if you like it. So the next step in this quest we are undertaking to determine if something can have objective quality or be objectively good is to try and find out if there are standards that naturally exist as a point of reference to anything that exists to then determine its quality. And in fact, there are. There are standards that are inherently tied to nearly anything that exists, completely irrespective of our personal views on them. As to how these standards get applied, well, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of reasons that are tied to culture and sociology and any of that. That's not the point of this video, to try and figure out why there are inherent standards that exist. I'm here to point out that they are. For instance, a piece of entertainment has an inherent standard that is absolutely tied to this thing in which it will constantly be judged against, and it is if it is entertaining. How can we determine if something achieves the standard of being entertaining? Well, going back to my sword analogy, people have very subjective and even arbitrary tastes to which they will apply to things to determine if they like it or indeed if they find something entertaining. I naturally find many things that have swords in them just more entertaining and enjoyable than things without swords. Like that's almost a personal philosophy. Add swords and it becomes cooler. Take a wedding, for instance. I personally believe throw swords in there, it naturally becomes cooler. And yes, I did have swords at my wedding. I cut a wedding cake with them because that's my personal taste. And that honestly made my wedding better for me because it had swords in there. But this reveals a very important thing about what we're trying to figure out regarding entertainment. People have subjective, arbitrary tastes in what they like and what they dislike. So then, if you find a subject matter that a large group of people like and then conform whatever you're making to that preference, you have an objective standard to try and achieve in succeeding if this group of people will like what you're trying to make. We suddenly have a target audience. And if you can meet the standards that the target audience wants to be fulfilled, you can satisfy their requirements to what they find entertaining or indeed what they like. And this can be applied broadly to things that are not meant to be entertaining. All we have to do is figure out the need. What is this thing meant to achieve? And if you can achieve it, you can then create something that is good and of quality. And the level in which you can achieve that standard will be the direct point of reference to determine if it is good or if it is of quality. And if you can achieve it to a great level, you can make something phenomenal. With this in mind, this is how something can be both good and bad according to two different standards that it is being judged against. And I see this most in reviews of entertainment media. Films, TV shows, video games, everything, where heaps of people say something is great and then another huge group of people say it's terrible. What these groups of people are doing are applying different standards in which they are judging the medium against. And according to whatever these standards are, these people are reaching an objective conclusion. According to that standard, it is objectively good, and according to whatever other standard, it is objectively bad. But are there more valid standards that should be applied which could actually help override other standards to determine if something is truly objectively good, irrespective of the different standards that people are trying to apply to this thing to judge it against? Yes, absolutely. And most of the time, these standards can be figured out by the very nature of what this thing is, what it is meant to achieve. A piece of entertainment is supposed to be entertaining, and judging it according to how effectively it educates might not be necessarily as valid if its purpose wasn't to educate. This can seem rather odd because I often criticize movies for how often they misrepresent certain historical facts, but this can be a bit of a misunderstanding. For instance, Take a movie that is set in the medieval period. Yes, it is absolutely meant to be entertaining, but by having a set historical period, it also has an inherent standard that it should be trying to achieve as well, and that is to reflect the historical period it's based in accurately as well. Otherwise, why did you even pick the historical period? Why did you choose these events to depict if you didn't want to reflect them accurately? Now, sometimes people choose historical events to exploit them for the pure goal of entertainment completely, and I feel disingenuously in many instances, disregarding the historical period in which it's based in. And even if they try and say this isn't meant to be a documentary to educate people, by the very nature of it having a historical period it's based in, it has a standard to which it will be judged against. And it can't be separated from that standard. Even the argument said it's not meant to be accurate, that doesn't divorce it from the standard that it is inherently tied to, from the fact it is a historical period it's trying to reflect or historical story. How important is it for it to achieve the historical accuracy versus the entertainment though? Ideally, we would want both, but if you're trying to get this thing to be as successful as it can be, and its success will be determined by how well it achieves its primary definition to be entertaining, well, the focus and most amount of effort will be put into achieving its entertainment value, not its historical accuracy standard. What is really interesting about this discussion is that the entertainment value will actually be affected by its historical accuracy. And sometimes making it more historically accurate can make it more entertaining, but at the same time, depending on execution, it can make it less entertaining. This is actually a very difficult thing to try and balance and do well, and this is why creating things of true quality is actually a very difficult thing, because the standards we are judging it against often has multiple things that need to be achieved for it to actually achieve the primary standard to the best level it can be. So for this movie based on a historical period, oftentimes its historical accuracy can enhance how entertaining it is. And there are so many other things that contribute to how entertaining it is as well. How consistently and well written the story is, the pacing, the action, how convincing the sets and costumes are so you can be drawn in and feel like you're watching something that's real. These are actually multiple different standards that need to be achieved individually to help contribute to the primary standard that this is going to be judged according to, and that is how entertaining it is. And this is also in conjunction to the primary target audience, because different people find different things entertaining. But if you can latch on to what a large group of people find entertaining and then try and create something that achieves their expectations, you can achieve something that is hugely entertaining for this group of people. And if you can then target a larger group of people and achieve their expectations and standards of what makes something good, what they find entertaining, you can create something that can be hugely entertaining to a very large group of people. The difficult thing that some people have trouble understanding, and when they're trying to execute it, they have trouble balancing it in a really big way, is this reality. For instance, the ultimate goal of creating something that is entertaining and the individual different things that people like, which will then contribute to ultimately how much they find this thing to be entertaining. Sometimes these individual things contradict one another, and when you enhance one, you naturally reduce another. They are intertwined and connected, and they affect one another in unbreakable ways. For instance, realism. This is a very interesting thing, because the reality is sometimes things that are purely realistic aren't that entertaining. How do we determine this? The different groups of people that find different specific things entertaining versus another. And oftentimes people share the same things that they prefer and like. And we have been able to figure out through trial and error what most people generally find entertaining and enjoyable. And once again, this can be very difficult because sometimes these different things that people like contradict one another, and it's impossible to enhance them both to the perfect level you can achieve achieve. And so the example I'm going to be giving here once again is the matter of realism. Oftentimes, the cold hard reality of something isn't nearly as entertaining in a given movie as the little tweaks to reality that we can interject into the movie to enhance it and make it more enjoyable. But these aren't universally applicable, okay? They're more generalities dependent on a case-by-case basis and then how effectively they're executed. A primary example, sound in space. Most science fiction, space operas or whatever have sound in space. Why? Because sound is very important to cue off to us as humans, as people, action, cause, and effect. When we see a flash of light from the barrel of a gun of something, we expect a sound to cue off the impact and power of that explosion or projectile. The louder the sound, the more impressive the explosion conveys impact to us as people who observe it, because in our real world, sound is ever present, and that is what accompanies cause and effect. And so the best way to convey impact and explosions in space is not only with the visual element, but the audio element is crucially important to convey that. And so with large space battles, generally speaking, having sound accompanying them creates a far more enjoyable experience for most audiences, depending on what the medium, the movie, is trying to achieve. If it's trying to be a far more realistic depiction of space, like say the movie's Gravity, even though there are a lot of unrealistic elements with it, but this is again a really important thing, because this movie was trying to be more realistic. The realistic elements are actually far more important in determining how entertaining this movie will be versus Star Wars. How realistic space physics are in Star Wars actually have far less of an impact as to how entertaining it will be versus a movie that's supposed to be more hard, realistic science fiction like Gravity was supposed to be. And therefore the inaccuracies in the space physics in a movie like Gravity have a far greater detrimental effect onto how entertaining we will judge it to be than Star Wars. They apply differently, but they are still objective standards that we are applying. It's just that these objective standards apply to different scales, and we determine these scales by what the movie is meant to be, because a piece of entertainment isn't just meant to be entertaining. There's a lot of other things as well, and for something like Gravity, again, it was meant to be more realistic on top of that, and also what the target audience generally likes. Do you need to conform any type of media to a target audience? Of course not, but it is very helpful to help the creator figure out what standards they need to try and achieve to make this entertaining to a group of people. And if the target audience is a large group of people, well then a large group of people could find it entertaining if you achieve their expectations properly. And even if anything is created without a target audience in mind, there is going to be a primary audience that will like it more than others, or will be more likely to like it versus others. If I'm creating something that is based in space with spaceships, but I'm not trying to conform to the general things that people like in science fiction, I'm not trying to make a science fiction, but it's just in space for spaceships, irrespective of my intentions for this media, already the people that like science fiction generally are more likely to enjoy this medium than others, depending on execution. If in fact I'm writing a love story in which the primary purpose of this story is about a relationship, and it just happens to be based in the future in space, but the space elements is such a minor thing to it, well, suddenly the target audience has changed. Even if I haven't catered it towards one, there is a group of people who are more likely to enjoy it over another. A really great example of this is actually Twilight, because the Twilight series, both the books and the movies, are a form of entertainment. But what type of entertainment are they meant to be? Is this meant to be a vampire story, or is it meant to be a teen girl romance? I think it's very safe to conclude that people who like vampire movies generally, and what a vampire movie is, would be determined by the collective works of the past, so this of course can change and be altered through time, but that doesn't change what the current standard is by what the previous works are, and therefore the standard that people would be judging it against. And regarding what the general vampire movie is, Twilight is not your general vampire movie. In fact, it actually breaks certain tropes and standards of what a vampire is supposed to be. And so according to that standard, Twilight is a fairly poor vampire story. But if you judge it according to a different standard, a teen girl romance, well, actually, according to that standard, Twilight has achieved a very high level of success to that target audience specifically. And so if Twilight is good or bad is very much dependent on the standard you're judging it against. If you were to judge it purely against the standards of what is considered good writing, and there are so many different things involved in what is considered good writing, trust me, this is something I've studied for years upon years, but one of the primary things you can apply to good writing is internal consistency. But in regards to literature, there's also prose, pacing, beats, dialogue. There are so many other things that is involved into what makes good writing, and there are a lot of people that criticize the Twilight books for being poorly written, according to that standard specifically. But if you were to try and figure out the general beats of what successful teen girl romances have in them, Twilight actually conforms very successfully to most of those in a very significant way. And because it achieves those beats so successfully, according to the standard of what makes a successful teen girl romance, Twilight actually is a very good teen girl romance if we were to judge it against that standard. And so if Twilight is good or bad, well, I think it actually very much determines on what it is most primarily meant to be, and is primarily meant to be entertaining to its target audience. And even though Twilight is very clearly meant to be a teen girl romance, it's actually more appreciated by women in general. There's a lot of guys, even most guys, that actually they don't get into Twilight because people have different preferences. But according to the preferences of the type of people that like this type of thing, Twilight is brilliant. In fact, it's been one of the best teen girl romances written in recent memory. But that again is a loaded thing because a lot of people like and insist that other standards must be applied to something to determine its overall quality, like writing quality. And with this example, we've come back to that thing that I was talking about, when different elements within a given work can actually contradict and work against one another. People criticize the character Bella for being poorly written, unrealistic, too bland, too much of a blank slate. But Bella's plainness, her extreme averageness, and it really is, like, if you've read the books, Bella is uniquely average in so many ways, in my opinion, actually helps a lot of readers who are the same demographic as the main character, a teen girl, envision themselves in place of Bella because it's so easy to remove her because there's not a lot there in the first place. Now that opinion is a bit harder to substantiate, probably take its own video to try and justify, and I don't think my own audience would be particularly interested in such a thing. In actual fact, I think they'd be far more interested in perhaps the character Rey from the more recent Star Wars films, because the failures in the character Rey are so much harder to justify. But going back to the core point in which I've been trying to make here is that there are some things that actually work against one another, and the creator of these mediums are going to need to choose what they feel will be most effective in achieving the standard they want to achieve, the purpose of this work. And boy, we have seen such profound examples in recent memory of people getting things drastically wrong, where they try and do something that they feel would be more entertaining, usually for a visual spectacle of some kind, and they completely disregard the other important elements that they are sacrificing to achieve it, thinking that this spectacle is going to be more important than the thing that they are undermining to achieve it. What am I talking about? The two best examples I can share are in the recent Star Wars movies, when the Star Destroyers burst up out of the ground in The Rise of Skywalker, or the Holdo maneuver in The Last Jedi. Both of these things are really visually impressive, and if you were to just look at them without any other point of reference to consider, it's easy to see that these are visually amazing, really impressive, and indeed cool. But the logical justification for these scenes are so flimsy and unjustified that they undermine another crucial element that needs to be done effectively and done right to achieve the standard of making something overall entertaining, especially if this is a story, and most movies are stories. You do need consistency, you do need things to conform to canon, and you need things to be logically justified. Why were these ships built in the ground? Because the only reason that I can think of is to get that visual shot of have them rising up the ground, because it's so impractical, and it just undermines any true acceptance of how awesome these scenes might be, but they are undermined by how silly they ultimately are. And so what enhances visually amazing things to tremendous levels are when they are justified. And the thing that needs to be acknowledged, as I mentioned before, it is also a scale. Sometimes you can push realism a little bit, like sound and space, just to make a more enjoyable experience. And we see this all the time when many things in entertainment media are not logically justified if we were to apply real-world standards physics to what we're seeing. Fight scenes in movies are another perfect example. If there is nothing in the world justifying it, like magic or superhuman abilities and things, which are in and of themselves completely unrealistic, but if they're internally consistent, you can get away with them. But if those things don't exist, the type of fight scenes that are often depicted in martial arts movies, action movies generally, they are wholly unrealistic. Real-world fight scenes, and my area of expertise are sword fights, are actually very, very short. But if you made every single sword fight in films to be wholly realistic to how realistic real sword fights are, so many of them would be far less entertaining. Not in every instance, because it's a case-by-case basis. But what we have discovered through much trial and error is that a fight scene that shows struggle, conflict, movement, and athleticism, where the physicality is really impressive, and the people in the fights are performing physical feats that the average person simply can't do, that requires extensive training to be able to do it. We naturally find these things more impressive and more entertaining, and this actually exists in the real world. When we see someone do something phenomenally difficult and they achieve it, like parkour videos or anything like that, we are naturally impressed by the spectacle. And so we want to apply that into movies as well to get the same entertainment thing that this is achieving. But when applied to an actual fight scene where doing flips and jumping around is wholly unrealistic and actually far more detrimental if you're in a real sword fight, these things actually often enhance the entertainment value, and I try to apply this in my reviews of fight scenes. I have a series on my channel called Fight Scene Autopsy, and I do acknowledge when moves are impractical but also flashy and impressive, and those moves can be justified, and I actually try and propose a new standard in fight scenes to try and see if you can meet in the middle. I personally feel that most fight scenes shouldn't be made wholly realistically like real-world fight scenes, but I do feel you can apply real-world fight styles. For instance, the attacks, the blocks, holding proper guards, not leaving yourself blatantly open to your opponent by removing your guard or spinning around, or other things like that. These are additional realistic elements I encourage to be added to fight scenes, and I even add in the fight scenes that I create in my books. But I don't insist that fight scenes in fictions, action movies, and my own books and stuff like that only last 1 to 3 move sets where they actually exchange the blades 1 to 3 times before someone dies or is injured and is out of the fight, because that's how real fight scenes work, and they are not nearly as engaging or enjoyable, especially in the context of a big, battle between 2 like master swordsmen or whatever in a fictional story. There are some instances where a purely realistic fight scene does work and some where it doesn't, and this whole part that I've been talking about right here is just an example of where realism is appropriately sacrificed to achieve a higher entertainment value. So let's try and bring this train of logic to its natural conclusion. Can something be objectively good? Yes, absolutely. And what I've just said there is an objective fact. according to the logic that I have just proposed. The way in which you can determine something to be objectively good is according to the standards that you are applying. And if something is achieving the expectations, the standards in multiple different areas, for instance, if we were to take the Twilight example. Twilight is a very well-written teen girl romance, but I have criticized it in other elements. Now, the thing that we need to understand is that nothing can achieve everyone's standard, okay? If you try and please everyone, oftentimes you'll probably please no one, okay? You need to pick the right audience. But Twilight could be even better if certain elements of the writing was done better. There are a lot of people that find the new Star Wars movies very entertaining, and according to the standard that they are applying, that is objectively true to them and their standard. But in the context of a story, something that has a narrative, it has an inherent standard that is inseparably connected to it, and no matter what anyone says, this is a standard that it will be judged against, and it is consistency, writing quality. Were there any instances where the poor writing was appropriately sacrificed to achieve a greater entertainment value in another area? Well, to determine that, you would need to present the arguments individually, and so far most of the arguments that I've heard, and I've heard a lot of them, no, they haven't been. There are cases in which such a situation does exist, but not with the ones that have been proposed to me regarding, say, Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker. For instance, the fact that Rey has so many Force abilities that she didn't train to achieve, and she didn't really train to achieve them in The Rise of Skywalker either, even though there was a training sequence. But what I'm saying here is the fact that she is so talented and so skilled in so many ways, and it is not nearly as justified or logically explained in the narrative proposed as we saw in other movies. Other Star Wars movies specifically, establishes Rey as an objectively worse character in comparison. And that's just one example. There are countless examples. In fact, I've gone over many, and many other people have as well. If you want to see what so many of these objective failings are in regards to the consistency in writing, I do recommend Mauler's videos. They are hugely in-depth and brilliant. So now let's try and figure out the inherent standards that are tied to a work and what makes one more valid than another. And as I said, it is very much dependent on what this thing is meant to be. It is never going to meet the standards of everyone because people have different standards. If I like swords and someone else likes axes, and you have a main character, you're never going to satisfy both groups equally, because if you give that person a sword and an axe, I would actually like that less than if they just had a sword, because I like swords better and I don't like the axe coming in to take the glory. And if you give them a sword, the people who like axes aren't going to like it nearly as much. So it's just a simple, basic example of the fact that you're never going to please everyone. The purpose of a work is to achieve the expectations and standards of the people who are most likely to enjoy it, or the very audience you are targeting by creating this work. And I personally feel you should always try and target a work to an audience, because that helps you hone in the elements and standards you'll want to try and achieve to make it a success. For instance, my own novel, I was trying to create a story that people who like hard magic systems would really like, who like epic fantasy, who like swords, because there's lots of swords in there, and I like so there, but I was also trying to create a unique world. And so for the people who like soft magic systems, I was not trying to please them. That wasn't the purpose of the book. I was trying to please the people who liked hard magic systems, and I was trying to make the best hard magic system for this story that I could. And that is the standard that it should be judged by. It is less valid to try and criticize my novel according to its lack of soft magic in it, because it has less soft magic in it, and that wasn't the purpose or intent. So the purpose and intent, or the group of people who are most likely to enjoy a thing, is the most primary standard that should be applied to something to determine if it is objectively good. And all the elements that help it achieve those standards in the best way possible are important elements that need to be done correctly, like writing quality, consistency, and other things like that. If you're writing a comedy, the most important standard to achieve is for it to be funny, and that's the primary standard. In actual fact, in regards to comedy, you can sacrifice writing consistency and logical validity if you can get people to laugh. And this is, again, a good example of the exchange, where sometimes you actually sacrifice certain elements to achieve the more important element of the work's purpose. And so, internal consistency and even realism are not always universal standards to judge something against. It depends what it is meant to be. And so there we go. This has been a very long train of logic and a very philosophical, but I feel very intriguing and important subject that is very important to me and the things that I try and create. I hope you have found it interesting as well, or indeed might have enjoyed it. If I achieved the standards and expectations you had for this video effectively. And I thank you for watching as well, and I hope to see you again. So until that time, farewell.